I want to start with what Judge Karen Henderson said today at the hearing.
I think it's paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal laws.
No matter what happened inside that courthouse, Donald Trump was going to walk out and say that it was a good day for him. But you listened to the judge. What is your takeaway from what she said?
Well, I think the entire hearing made clear that there was profound skepticism from all three of the judges of the D.C. Circuit for this argument that Donald Trump had some kind of absolute presidential immunity that shielded him from any kind of criminal prosecution, whether during his presidency or after it. And the question that Judge Henderson posed was really about this question of whether or not when a president undertakes certain official acts, he is immune. This comes from a civil case, Nixon versus Fitzgerald, that says that there is qualified immunity for presidents when they undertake certain actions within the scope of their role as chief executive and then are later sued civilly. It says nothing about criminal liability, and it certainly doesn't say anything about actions that are maybe outside of the scope of presidential duties. And Judge Henderson is sort of getting at the point that this was really about staying in power. That's not necessarily in line or consistent with the execution of the presidential role, and it would be a perversion of the office to suggest that the president's job required him to stop a political rival from lawfully taking office in a duly conducted election.
Katie, Jack Smith himself, much like Donald Trump, was in the courthouse. He does not show up for every hearing. What will the outcome of this mean for him and for this whole entire thing and other Trump cases?
You know, to your point, it shows how important this hearing was that Jack Smith decided to be there. While, as Melissa said, the judges did seem skeptical of Trump's lawyer's argument, judges appointed by Republicans and Democrats, by the way. What's unclear is exactly how they will rule, the scope of the ruling. There was talk about whether or not the case should be sent back down to the district court to have the judge there, talk about whether or not Trump's acts that he took that are issue were official duties, et cetera. So really what's at stake is whether or not the ruling allows Trump to prolong his set of appeals and how long it will take him. So, for example, if they send it back to the district court, we're in for a really long wait. If they don't, if they make a ruling and it's narrowly tailored, something that the full, all of the, judges who are all of the appeals court in D.C. might agree with, we might move along a little faster. If not, we could see this go to the full set of appeals judges, and then it could go to the Supreme Court. So this is really about timing, and that's what we're going to wait to see, how they rule, but really how wide a scope they take and whether or not this is something that they choose to prolong.
All right, Matthew, let's think about Trump or Trump's lawyers' arguments, right? If a president can commit high crimes and have complete immunity as long as he's not impeached or convicted, what's to stop any president from committing crimes every day of the week? Aren't they making that argument?
Of course. And actually, what's to stop a president from shooting 3 U.S. senators to make sure he's not convicted? Because if you're not convicted, you can eliminate the people that will convict you. And so he could eliminate House members, he could eliminate Senate members. And so the whole thing is, I'm not surprised that Donald Trump would attempt to make an argument like this because he says some bizarre things. But for people that are members of the bar to make an argument like this, and the lawyers and the folks on the panel could better discuss that, the fact that lawyers of the bar would make an argument like this is absolutely amazing to me.
That is what is so interesting, Melissa, right? We've heard Donald Trump say for years, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he'd still have the support he always did. But for his lawyers to do so, what does that tell you?
Well, every defendant is entitled to a vigorous defense. This may be more vigorous than most. But again, he's making a number of different claims here. But the point is exactly what Katie laid out. His tactical advantage has always been to run out the clock here. And there are at least 3 different ways that he could do that. Appealing to the Supreme Court, if this goes in a way that he doesn't appreciate, it could be sent back to Judge Chutkan to decide this question, which she didn't decide in her initial ruling, which was whether or not those acts were within the official scope of his duties or outside of them. That was left aside because she concluded that there was no immunity for him for these acts entirely. So that's one thing. And then it could come back to this court. It could be heard by another 3-judge panel. It could then be referred to an en banc panel. So, I mean, there are a lot of different ways. All of them require an additional outlay of time. And if you have this March 4th deadline for this trial to begin, all of that is just frittering away the amount of time. I mean, we're 3 months away from March 4th. And so at this point, the fact that we're having this hearing is a tactical victory for Donald Trump because it does mean that he's running out the clock to some degree.
Delay is this defense's dream, and it has worked for Donald Trump in the past. Sam, what does all of this tell you about who Donald Trump is and what he's willing to do?
Let me just say we're 2 months away from March 4th. And so the likelihood is that this case will, in fact, be pushed back. And I think that's the whole entire point here, just to agree with all my fellow esteemed panelists here. He will do whatever it takes to draw this out. He wants to push these cases past the election, both as a sort of short-term political matter, get it out of the way, don't have a conviction before or a trial of some sort prior to the election, but also sort of as a longer-term strategic matter. You know, if he is elected president, he can assume office and direct the Justice Department, now under his purview, to dismiss the cases entirely, or he could go even further and potentially issue a pardon to himself, if need be. That is the sort of grand tactic here for Trump. And look, I don't think Trump is sort of wedded to, constitutional principles or specific legal arguments. I think he instructed his lawyers to say, do whatever it takes, find whatever argument is worthwhile to throw sand in the gears. And that's what they're doing.
Melissa, let's go back in time, and I want to share just a bit of sound from what we heard from Trump's lawyer during his second impeachment back in 2021.
If my colleagues on this side of the chamber actually think that President Trump committed a criminal offense, and let's understand, a high crime is a felony and a misdemeanor is a misdemeanor. The words haven't changed that much over the time. After he's out of office, you go and arrest him. So there is no opportunity where the President of the United States can run rampant in January, the end of his term, and just go away scot-free. The Department of Justice does know what to do with such people.
I don't know about that. One of the judges mentioned these very remarks. So if you fast forward to today, Melissa, isn't it kind of incredible that Trump is where he is, now actually facing DOJ prosecution?
Well, I mean, the judges seem to be even more alarmed by the prospect that the defense was saying that what needed to happen first was an impeachment and a conviction on that impeachment, because we've seen not once but twice in the case of Donald Trump that impeachment is very much a paper tiger here, right? It's toothless at this point, given the polarization in both chambers of the Congress and especially in the Senate. And so the real question is, if that cannot be a check on the president, and then you cannot have a criminal prosecution in the absence of a conviction on impeachment, what kinds of checks on this particular role do you have? It basically becomes a dictatorship, if you will. There's no way to check the president if impeachment is a paper tiger and criminal prosecution isn't available. And that actually did seem alarming to some of the judges. And again, Judge Florence Pant, for example, was absolutely relentless in sort of driving down on what could the president do in the absence of any real check on his authority.
Over at the New York Times, they created this timeline of Donald Trump's pattern of pressure to overturn the 2020 election from right after the vote up until January 6th, even after the January 6th hearings. Katie, do people get that the evidence actually shows a real coordinated effort here?
So I think that what is so interesting is Melissa just mentioned how alarmed the judges were. We've become so numb to this. So when you look at this graphic, it's startling, right? But because this happened over so many months and now so many years, I do think that the public has grown tired of it. They're either tuning out, they're growing numb, they're not wanting to see or not able to see at this point this bigger picture. It's also laid out in Jack Smith's indictment. What's fascinating is to see how judges are responding. Again, appointed by Republicans, appointed by Democrats, seeing that alarm at the sorts of arguments that Trump is making, which mirror the public statements he's been making that people have also grown somewhat numb to. But yes, when you take a look, step back, see the full graphic, it's startling. And also what's not captured in that is the fact that even after Donald Trump won in 2016, he took office, and one of the very first things he said in his first major network interview was that there was voter fraud and that he felt that he shouldn't have lost the popular vote, and that must be because of fraud. So this is a line he's taken for so long, and now because it led to January 6th, a violent attack on the Capitol, we're being forced to take it seriously, and it is the judiciary that is in a position to weigh in a new way with fresh eyes.